She was a starving beggar beaten and left for dead, then married off to a 71-year-old cattle baron with eyes like ice and secrets buried deep. But on the 7th day inside his locked room, she uncovered the unthinkable. She hadn't just married a stranger. She had married her own father. If that shook you like it shook me, don't forget to drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories just like this. And stick around, because what happens next will break your heart even more. You stupid little rat. That horse costs more than your entire life ever will. The words hit Mary like a slap. Her knees buckled under the weight of shame before she even knew she'd dropped. Dust rose around her like a shroud as she collapsed to the barn floor, hands trembling, chest tight. "I didn't mean to, sir. I swear I didn't see the thorn patch. He just... Her voice cracked, dry, desperate. Her palms pressed flat against the dirt, trying to crawl forward, her eyes stinging from both the heat and humiliation. The morning sun burned down through the slats in the roof, casting stripes across the barn floor, where her thin frame lay bent and shaking. Old man Gentry, owner of the Red Buck Ranch, stood above her, red-faced and puffing like a boiler. His gut swayed under his suspenders, and the vein on his neck looked like it might burst clean through his skin. He pointed down at her with a stiff, sun-spotted finger, trembling not from age, but from disgust. "Damn horse limping now, and it's on you. You think I'm gonna pay you after this? You ain't worth the spit on my boots." Mary clawed toward him, dragging herself like a child begging a god that don't exist. "Please, please, Mr. Gentry. I haven't eaten in 2 days, sir. I'll work the fences, clean the stalls all night if I have to, just please. I need that money. Mama's gone. I ain't got nobody." Gentry's boot lashed out. Not hard, not like he wanted to break bone, but just enough to knock her back on her haunches like a dog told to heel. "Should have thought about that before you let my best stallion step into a damn cactus patch." She didn't cry. Not anymore. The tears dried up months ago, somewhere between burying her mother in a borrowed plot and sleeping in the loft of an abandoned tool shed outside of Carson's Ridge. She just bowed her head, lower lips, brushing against the cracked leather of his boot. "I'll do anything. Just please don't throw me out yet. I need to eat." He sneered, then spit beside her face. "You're an eyesore. Can't stand looking at you another day." A whistle rang out from behind. One of the ranch hands, a stocky man named Roy with knuckles like stone, stepped forward without being told. He didn't say a word, just yanked Mary up by the arm like lifting a sack of flour and half-dragged, half-shoved her through the dusty yard. The last thing she saw before the gate slammed shut behind her was Gentry's weathered hand stroking the nose of that prized stallion. Mary lay there a moment, the world spinning her shoulder, throbbing where the boot had landed. The sky above was endless, cruel in its indifference. She pushed herself up, knees wobbling, and stumbled down the dirt path toward town. Her hands shook as she wiped her face, smearing tears and grit. By the time she reached Coyote Bluffs, the town was settling into dusk storefronts, shuttered lanterns flickering in windows. Mary's shack, a leaning pile of boards on the edge of town, offered no comfort. Inside, she sank onto the straw mattress, her only possession besides a tin cup and a cracked plate. From her pocket, she pulled the one thing that mattered: half a photograph edges, frayed corners soft from years of handling. Her mother Isabella smiled in it, young and radiant, her arm linked with a man whose face was gone, torn away long ago. Mary traced her mother's face with a calloused finger, the ache in her chest sharper than Garrison's kick. "Who were you?" she whispered, though she knew the answer wouldn't come. Her mother's last words echoed in her mind, faint as a dream. Live, decent Mary. Someone will know you one day. A crust of old bread she'd saved from 2 days before was crumbling in her hand. She stared at it but didn't eat. Instead, her fingers dug into her coat pocket until they found the soft paper there, the only thing she still carried that wasn't necessity. Half a photo. She unfolded it slowly, carefully, like it might crack if she breathed too hard. Her mother's smile still looked kind after all these years. Her hair tied back, eyes shining like she was looking at someone she loved dearly, someone whose face had been ripped away. Mary had stared at that photo more times than she could count, wishing the other half might magically grow back. Her mother never told her his name, just stories, vague ones, about a man with kind hands and sad eyes, about promises made under willow trees and letters that never came. Live, decent Mary, her mother had whispered one night when the fever was bad. And someone somewhere will see who you are. Mary had clung to that, even now, even with nothing left. She'd been 12 when her mother died, taken by fever in a single winter night. Isabella never spoke of Mary's father, only hinted at a love that broke her, a man forbidden by forces Mary couldn't name. In her dreams, Mary saw them, her mother laughing under a willow tree, a man's shadow beside her, his face blurred like smoke. Each time she woke, the photograph felt heavier, a question she carried like a stone. She tucked it back into her pocket, too tired to eat the stale crust of bread. Sleep came hard, haunted by the echo of Garrison's voice and the shadow of a man she'd never know. The next morning, Mary was on her knees again, this time in the street, her hands cupped before a passing merchant. "Please, sir, any work I can clean, mend anything," she begged, her voice hoarse, her eyes fixed on the man's polished boots. He didn't even look down, just stepped around her like she was a stray dog. The town moved on, wagons creaking, men spitting tobacco, women whispering behind gloved hands. Mary's stomach growled a low, angry rumble. She'd eaten nothing since yesterday's crust, and the coins in her pocket wouldn't buy a loaf. Hunger was an old friend, but it never got easier. She was pleading with a shopkeeper, her words stumbling over each other when a shadow fell across her. A cowboy stood there, dust on his coat hat low over his eyes. He didn't speak, just held out a cream-colored envelope, its edges embossed a faint scent of lavender and gunpowder clinging to it. Mary's hands trembled as she took it, her fingers brushing the rough paper. The cowboy turned, mounted his horse, and was gone before she could ask his name. She stared at the envelope, her heart thudding. No one wrote to girls like her. No one knew her name. She tore it open, careful not to rip the paper. Inside, a note in elegant script: Miss Dawson supper, Blackthorn Range. Tonight. Come clean. Come quiet. No signature, no explanation. Blackthorn Range. The name sent a shiver through her, though she couldn't say why. Everyone in Coyote Bluffs knew of Alexander Blackthorn, the baron who owned half the county's land, a man who hadn't shown his face in town for years. Folks said he was richer than God, and twice as cruel, his ranch a fortress of iron gates and secrets. Mary's first thought was to burn the note, to run from whatever game a man like that played with a girl like her. But the hunger in her belly and the ache in her chest, the one tied to that torn photograph, held her still. Why would someone like that call on her? Her first thought was mistake. Second thought, trick. But by the third, something in her gut stirred. A slow, steady pull, like a thread behind her ribs being tugged towards something she hadn't felt in years. The phrase turned over in her mind, heavy as a plow. What did Blackthorn want? A hired hand. A servant. something worse. She'd heard stories of girls lured to ranches never seen again, but the note's scent, that mix of lavender and gunpowder, stirred something in her, a memory she couldn't place. Maybe it was desperation, maybe it was madness, but Mary felt a pull like a rope tugging her toward the unknown. She didn't own a dress, not a proper one. Her shirt was patched, her trousers frayed, but she borrowed a faded calico skirt from a neighbor, a woman who pitied her enough to help, but not enough to ask questions. Mary scrubbed her face and hands in a bucket of cold water, her reflection rippling in the dim light. Her brown eyes looked too big for her face, her cheeks hollow from too many missed meals. She combed her hair, tied it back with a scrap of twine, and polished her boots with a rag until they gleamed, though the soles were near gone. She didn't look like much, but she looked like herself, and that would have to do. As she set out, the sun was dipping low, painting the hills in shades of blood and gold. Coyote Bluffs faded behind her, the town's noise giving way to the hum of cicadas and the crunch of her boots on gravel. Blackthorn Range lay west, a half-day's walk, its gates said to be forged from iron and fear. Mary's hand kept drifting to her pocket, to the photograph, as if it could steady her. She didn't know what waited at the end of this road, a job, a trap, or an answer to the question she'd carried all her life. But she walked on her shadow, stretching long and thin like a girl reaching for something just out of grasp. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and dust. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled its cry, sharp and lonely. Mary's steps didn't falter, though her heart beat faster. She'd been kicked, shamed, and thrown out before. Whatever Blackthorn wanted, she'd face it standing. The photograph in her pocket felt warm, like it was whispering her mother's words back to her, "Live, decent Mary." She squared her shoulders, her jaw tight. The gates of Blackthorn Range loomed high and black, wrought with twisted metal that curled like thorned vines around a capital letter B. They didn't creak or groan when they opened. A silent ranch hand met her at the gate, his face hard as the leather of his holster. He didn't speak, just nodded toward the path winding up to the main house. It sat high on a hill, a fortress of stone and timber, its wraparound porch held up by pillars thick as ancient oaks. The windows glowed faintly like eyes watching her approach. Mary's borrowed skirt swished against her boots, the calico fabric stiff and unfamiliar. She felt small, out of place, like a sparrow landing in a hawk's nest. The air smelled of sage and something sharper like oiled steel. The coyote's howl lingered in her ears, a warning she couldn't shake. Inside the house was colder than the evening air, its marble floors gleaming under gaslight chandeliers. Paintings lined the walls, stern men in old-fashioned coats, horses rearing against stormy skies, and one faded portrait of a young woman with eyes like Mary's mother, though she couldn't be sure. Servants moved like ghosts, their steps silent, their faces blank. One led her through a maze of halls to a heavy oak door, carved with vines and rifle barrels. "He's waitin'," the servant said, her voice barely above a whisper, before vanishing into the shadows. Mary pushed the door open, her heart thudding against her ribs. The dining hall was long and dim, a polished oak table stretching like a river under flickering candlelight. At its far end sat Alexander Blackthorn, his silver hair catching the glow like ash after a fire. His face was lined not just with age, but with something heavier, grief maybe, or secrets. His eyes, pale and sharp, fixed on her, and for a moment she felt like he was looking through her past, her to a place she couldn't see. He wore a dark suit, crisp, but worn as if it had seen too many years. "Miss Dawson," he said, his voice low and measured like a man choosing each word with care. You came. Didn't see much choice. Sir, Mary replied, her voice steadier than she felt. She clutched her hat in her hands, the brim crumpled from nervous twisting. Your note didn't say why. Sit, he said, gesturing to a chair across the table. Eat first. Talk after. She hesitated, then sank into the seat, the wood creaking under her. The table was set with roast beef potatoes steaming in a bowl and a loaf of bread so fresh it smelled like home, though home had never been this grand. A bottle of wine dark as ink sat untouched near Blackthorn. Mary's stomach growled loud enough to make her cheeks burn, but she kept her hands in her lap. She didn't trust free meals, not from men like him. You eat beef stew? He asked. She blinked. Yes, sir. He nodded once, then dipped a spoon into his own bowl. She followed. It was rich, thick, full of tender meat and carrots that didn't crunch. She hadn't tasted food like this since before her mama took sick. He didn't speak while they ate, and Mary, having learned when to keep quiet, didn't either. But she could feel him looking. Not rude, not even curious, just searching. When her bowl was half empty, he set his spoon down, folded his hands. I brought you here for a reason, he said, and I won't waste either of our time. You're wondering why you're here, he said finally, his voice cutting through the silence. I'll keep it plain. I need a wife, legal, for 7 days. No more, no less. Her spoon clinked against the bowl. He didn't flinch. Mary stared. Her first thought, he was touched in the head. Her second, maybe this was some long, cruel joke. But his eyes didn't waver. Mary blinked her fork halfway to her plate. A wife. The word felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else. Why me? I ain't nobody. Just a hired hand with nothing to my name. He leaned back, his eyes narrowing not with anger, but with something colder, like he was weighing her soul. Because you're nobody, he said. You're poor, honest, and won't be missed if things go wrong. I need someone to sign papers, stand before a preacher, and walk away when it's done. In return, you'll have enough money to live easy. No more begging in the streets. Her throat tightened, the memory of yesterday's humiliation, kneeling in the dust, pleading for work still raw. She wanted to laugh, to call it a cruel joke, but Blackthorn's face was stone, no trace of humor. You don't know me, she said, her voice low, almost a challenge. Why trust me with something like that? I don't need to know you, he said. I know enough. You're the right fit for what I need. That's all that matters. Mary's fingers drifted to her pocket again, to the photograph, its edges pressing into her skin. She thought of her mother, the torn picture, the man whose face was gone. Something about Blackthorn's voice. His choice of words stirred a shadow in her mind, a flicker of something she couldn't name. And after 7 days, she asked, her eyes locked on his. What happens then? We part ways, he said, pouring himself a glass of wine, the liquid catching the candlelight like blood. You get your money. I get my affairs in order. No questions, no ties. The room felt smaller, the air thick with unspoken things. Mary's mind raced. She'd heard of men buying brides for land deals or to settle debts, but this was different. Blackthorn didn't need her for show. He had wealth power, a name that carried weight. So why her? Why now? The photograph in her pocket felt heavier, like it was trying to tell her something she wasn't ready to hear. I need to think on it, she said, pushing her plate away, the food untouched. You have till dawn, he said, standing his shadow long across the table. If you say yes, meet me at the chapel down the hill. If you say no, you walk away with nothing but the meal you didn't eat." He left her there, the door closing soft behind him. Mary sat alone, the candles burning low, the house creaking like it was whispering secrets. She didn't sleep that night, just wandered the halls, her boots muffled on the cold marble. The paintings seemed to watch her, their eyes following her steps. 1. A portrait of a young blackthorn made her pause. His face was younger, softer, but those eyes, they were the same, haunted and searching. Dawn came gray and quiet, the sky heavy with clouds. Mary stood before the chapel, a small wooden building dwarfed by the ranch's grandeur. Her borrowed skirt was wrinkled now, her hands raw from nervous rubbing. Blackthorn was already there, dressed in black, his silver hair tucked under a hat. A preacher, old and weary, stood beside him, a Bible clutched to his chest. 2 ranch hands lingered nearby, their faces blank, their holsters heavy. "You're here," Blackthorn said, his voice flat like he'd expected her to run. "I ain't got much to lose," Mary said, her jaw tight. "But I'm watching you, sir. This don't feel right." He nodded just once, like he respected her suspicion. "It ain't about feeling right," he said. "It's about doing what's needed." The ceremony was quick. No flowers, no music, just words spoken in a rush. "Do you, Mary Dawson, take this man?" the preacher asked, his voice creaking like old wood. Mary looked at Blackthorn, his eyes unreadable like a storm waiting to break. "I do," she said, the words heavy like signing a debt she didn't understand. "And you, Alexander Blackthorn, take this woman, I must," he said, his voice low, final, like a door locking shut. They signed the papers, their names stark on the page. No kiss, no smiles, just the scratch of the pen and the wind whistling outside. Mary felt the weight of it all, the house, the man, the photograph in her pocket, like she'd stepped into a story too big for her to hold. As they walked back to the house, Blackthorn silent beside her, she wondered what she'd traded her name for. The ranch loomed ahead, its gates closing behind her, and somewhere deep inside, a locked door waited, holding secrets she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Inside the house was a world apart from Coyote Bluffs' sagging shacks. Marble floors stretched under her boots, cold and unyielding, reflecting the flicker of gaslight chandeliers. Servants moved like shadows, their eyes downcast, their steps hushed, as if the house demanded silence. They called her Mrs. Blackthorn, now the title strange and heavy, like a coat that didn't fit. A maid, gray-haired and thin as a fence post, led her to a room with a 4-poster bed, silk sheets, and a window overlooking canyons that stretched into forever. Mary stood there, her patched bag at her feet, feeling like a trespasser in her own life. The bed was soft, the pillows softer, but sleep didn't come easy. The house creaked through the night, its groans like whispers of things left unsaid. Days passed in a haze of wealth and isolation. Breakfast appeared each morning, bacon, crisp eggs, sunny cornbread warm enough to steam, but Mary ate alone, the long dining table a silent witness to her unease. The servants were polite, too polite, their smiles tight, their eyes sliding away when she tried to meet them. Mrs. Blackthorn need anything they'd ask, but the question felt like a warning, like they were waiting for her to overstep. She wandered the ranch, past stables where horses snorted and pawed, past fences that seemed to guard more than cattle. The hands called her ma'am. Their voices clipped their hands, never far from their holsters. She was the Baron's wife, but she felt like a ghost, seen but not known. Alexander was a shadow in his own house. By day, he was gone riding the range, meeting with men in dark suits, or locked in his study, where papers rustled like dry leaves. At night, he sat alone on the wide veranda, a glass of wine in one hand, a stack of yellowed letters in the other. Mary watched him from the hallway, her steps soft on the marble, her breath held tight. He'd read each letter slow, his face unreadable, then fold it carefully like it held a piece of his soul. Then he'd stand stiff as an old oak and walk to the end of the hall where a heavy door waited, its iron handle gleaming under the gaslight. The key hung on a chain around his neck, and when he turned it, the lock clicked like a secret snapping shut. Once Mary gathered the nerve to ask, "What's behind that door, Mr. Blackthorne?" He'd looked at her, his eyes pale and distant, like a winter sky. "That's the part of me that's still mine," he said, his voice low, final. He didn't invite questions, and she didn't ask again. But the door stayed in her mind, a puzzle she couldn't leave alone. On the third night, Mary woke to a faint rustle like paper sliding on wood. She sat up, her heart thumping the darkness thick around her. Under her door, a folded note lay, its edges sharp in the moonlight. She lit a candle, her hands trembling, and opened it. The words were written in ink so black it seemed to drink the light. "You got 6 days left to know who you really are. No name, no hint of who sent it." She turned the paper over, searching for more, but it was blank cold as the floor beneath her feet. Her mother's photograph sat on the bedside table, her smile faint in the candlelight. Mary clutched it, the torn edge rough against her thumb. "Someone will know you," her mother had said. But who? And why now? From that night, the house felt different, like it was watching her. The servants' glances lingered too long, their whispers cut off when she entered a room. The ranch hands avoided her, their eyes fixed on the ground, their hands twitching near their belts. Even the horses seemed restless, snorting when she passed the stables, their hooves kicking up clouds of dust. Mary started noticing small things, a creak in the hall when no one was there, a curtain fluttering with no breeze, a shadow that moved too slow to be her own. She told herself it was nerves, the weight of a strange marriage, but the note burned in her mind, its words a riddle she couldn't solve. Her days took on a new rhythm, one of watching and waiting. She walked the house slow, her boots soft on the marble, her eyes tracing every detail. The paintings on the walls told stories she didn't understand, men with stern faces, women with sad eyes, a ranch under a storm-black sky. One portrait, half hidden in a corner, showed a young woman in a blue dress, her hair dark like Mary's, her smile soft but broken. Mary stared at it, her breath catching. It wasn't her mother, but the likeness stirred something deep, like a memory she didn't know she had. She started lingering near Alexander's study, her steps careful, her ears sharp. The door was always locked, but once when a servant left it ajar, she glimpsed a desk piled with papers, a map pinned to the wall, and a single photograph frame turned face down. Her heart raced, urging her to slip inside, but footsteps echoed behind her and she hurried away. The servants noticed her curiosity, their eyes narrowing, their voices hushed. "Best not to wander, ma'am," one maid said, her tone sharp as a blade. Mary nodded, but her mind didn't rest. The more she watched Alexander, the more she saw the cracks in his calm. His hands shook when he poured his wine. His eyes lingered on the horizon like he was searching for something lost. One night, as he sat on the veranda, she stood in the shadows, her breath shallow. He read a letter, his lips moving silently, then pressed it to his chest, his shoulders sagging like a man carrying too much. When he stood and walked to the locked door, Mary followed her steps silent, her pulse loud in her ears. The key turned, the door opened, and for a moment she saw a flicker of light inside a candle maybe, or something else. Then the door closed, and the house was silent again. Mary couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't here by chance. The note, the door, Alexander's strange proposal, it all pointed to something bigger, something tied to the photograph in her pocket. She thought of her mother, the torn picture, the man whose face was gone. Was Alexander that man? Or was he hiding something else, something that could break her or set her free? She didn't know, but the doubt was a fire in her chest, burning hotter each day. By the fourth day, Mary was searching in earnest. She moved through the house like a thief, her eyes sharp, her hands quick. She checked drawers, system drawers, finding keys left unattended or listening at doors. She didn't dare touch anything, but she memorized the patterns of the servants' routines, the times when the study was empty. The note, "You got 6 days left to know who you really are," was folded in her pocket beside the photograph, its words a constant whisper in her mind. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she knew it was here in this house behind that locked door. The wind howled outside Blackthorn Range, rattling the windows like a warning, but inside the house was still, its silence heavy as a held breath. Mary lay awake, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, the shadows dancing in the flicker of a dying candle. Each night, as Alexander disappeared behind that locked door at the end of the hall, her thoughts twisted tighter, like barbed wire caught in a storm. The house was a puzzle, its pieces jagged and sharp, and she was a stranger in it, a wife in name, only watched by eyes that never met hers. The servants' whispers, the ranch hands' quick glances, the creak of floorboards when no one walked, they all told her she was being judged, maybe feared. The photograph in her pocket, her mother's torn smile felt alive, urging her to keep searching to find the truth before her 7 days ran dry. The note she'd found, "You got 6 days left to know who you really are," burned in her mind, its words a spur digging into her restless heart. By the 6th night, Mary couldn't stand it anymore. The questions were a weight heavier than hunger, heavier than the shame of begging in the streets. She waited until the house was quiet, the servants gone to their quarters, the ranch hands out in the bunkhouse. Alexander had gone to his veranda ritual, reading his letters, drinking his wine, then locking himself away. The hall was dark, the gaslights dimmed to a faint glow. Mary slipped from her room, her boots in hand to muffle her steps, her breath shallow as she moved toward the study. The door was heavy oak, its handle cold under her fingers. She'd seen a maid leave it unlocked once, a careless mistake, and tonight she prayed it would be again. The knob turned silent and smooth. Mary slipped inside, closing the door behind her, her heart pounding so loud she feared it would wake the house. The study smelled of leather and dust, its walls lined with bookshelves that reached the ceiling, their spines worn but untouched like relics of a life no one lived anymore. A mahogany desk dominated the room, its surface cluttered with papers, a quill pen, and a map of the ranch, its edges curled like old skin. A single candle burned low, casting shadows that flickered like ghosts. Mary's eyes darted to a small wooden chest in the corner, its lock rusted but sturdy. She didn't touch it, not yet. Instead, she moved to the desk, her fingers trembling as she sifted through the papers, ledgers, deeds, letters sealed with wax. Nothing told her why she was here, why Alexander had chosen her. Then she saw it half hidden under a stack of yellowed envelopes, a leather-bound journal. Its cover cracked its pages thick with secrets. Mary's breath caught as she lifted it, the weight of it heavy in her hands. She glanced at the door, listening for footsteps, but the house was still, its silence oppressive. She opened the journal, her fingers careful as if it might crumble under her touch. The handwriting was tight, precise. The ink faded, but clear. Alexander's words spilled across the pages, each one a confession, a wound laid bare. I loved her. The first entry read, dated 25 years ago. Isabella was everything. Her laugh, her fire, the way she looked at the stars like they belonged to her. But my family called her dirt, a nobody, and they tore us apart. They forced me to marry Elizabeth, a woman I never wanted for land and name. They told me Isabella was dead, drowned in a river. I believed them. God help me, and I stopped looking. Mary's hands shook the name Isabella, a blade in her chest. Her mother's name written in a stranger's hand in a house that felt like a tomb. She turned the page, her eyes racing over the words. Years later, I heard whispers she'd lived sent away, shamed with a child. My child. I searched, but the trail was cold, the proof gone. If she's out there, God let her forgive me. I failed her, failed them both. The words blurred as tears stung Mary's eyes. She didn't want to believe it, didn't want to feel the truth creeping up her spine. But the journal didn't lie. She turned another page, her breath ragged, and there tucked between the pages was a folded piece of paper, its edges torn, its surface yellowed with time. She unfolded it, her hands unsteady, and froze. It was a photograph, half of one showing a man in a dark coat, his arm linked with a woman whose face was missing. Mary's heart stopped. She reached into her pocket, pulling out her own torn photograph, the one she'd carried since her mother died. Her mother's smile, young and bright, stared back at her, the man beside her gone. With trembling fingers, Mary held the two halves together, aligning the jagged edges. They fit perfect and whole, like a wound stitched shut. The man in the photograph was younger, his hair dark, his eyes sharp but kind. Alexander Blackthorne, unmistakable, standing beside her mother, their hands touching, their smiles soft. Mary sank to her knees, the journal falling to the floor, the photographs clutched to her chest. The truth hit her like a kick to the gut, stealing her breath, her strength. Alexander Blackthorne, the man she'd married in a cold, empty chapel, was her father. Her father who'd left her mother to suffer, who'd never known her, who'd brought her here under a lie to make things right. She wanted to scream, to tear the photographs apart, to run from this house and its secrets. But she couldn't move, couldn't think past the pain in her chest. He'd known. He'd known who she was, and he'd married her not for love, not for show, but to give her what he thought he owed. The money, the ranch, the name, it was all his guilt written in ink and signed in a chapel. She saw it now, the way his eyes lingered on her, not with warmth, but with sorrow, like he was seeing someone else. Her mother, maybe, or the daughter he'd lost. Footsteps echoed in the hall, heavy and slow. Mary scrambled to her feet, shoving the photographs into her pocket, the journal back onto the desk. She slipped out of the study, her heart racing, and made it to her room just as a shadow passed her door. She didn't sleep, didn't even try. The truth was, a weight she couldn't carry, a truth she didn't want. Alexander had known she was his daughter, but he hadn't claimed her, hadn't spoken her mother's name. Instead, he'd bound her to him with a marriage, a legal trick to pass on his wealth, to ease his conscience before it was too late. She thought of the locked door at the end of the hall, the one he'd called the part of me that's still mine. What was behind it? More letters, more photographs, or something else, something that would make this pain make sense. She didn't know, but she couldn't stay still anymore. The note, "You got 6 days left to know who you really are," felt like a cruel joke. Now its words mocking her from the shadows. She was Mary Dawson, daughter of Isabella, daughter of Alexander Blackthorne, and she'd been made a pawn in a game she hadn't chosen. The house was quiet, but it wasn't asleep. The creaks, the whispers, the eyes that followed her, they were all part of this truth, this secret Alexander had buried. Mary sat on her bed, the photographs in her hands, their edges pressed together. She saw her mother's smile, her father's youth, a love that had been torn apart like the paper in her fingers. She didn't cry, not anymore. She'd cried enough in the streets, in the dust, in the years of hunger and loss. Instead, she felt a fire kindling inside her, a need to know why, to hear it from his lips. The 7th day was coming, and with it, the end of their deal. But Mary wasn't sure she could walk away. Not now. Not when the truth was so close and so sharp. Outside, the wind howled, carrying the cry of a coyote, its voice lonely and raw. The house answered with its own sounds, the creak of wood, the sigh of the walls. Mary clutched the photographs, her mother's face whole again, and knew she'd have to face Alexander not as a wife, not as a stranger, but as a daughter demanding answers. The locked door at the end of the hall was waiting, and she wasn't sure she was ready for what it held. The dawn broke cold over Blackthorn Range, the sky bruised with clouds that hung low like they were grieving. Mary Dawson woke with the weight of the truth still heavy in her chest, the two halves of the photograph pressed together in her pocket, her mother's smile now joined to Alexander Blackthorn's face. She'd barely slept, her mind tangled with questions and pain, the journal's words burning behind her eyes. Her father had married her to, right or wrong, to pass on a legacy he'd buried under years of guilt. She needed to hear it from him, needed to know why he'd hidden her, why he'd let her grow up hungry and alone. But when she stepped into the hall, the house was too quiet, its usual creaks and whispers gone like a heart that had stopped beating. She called for Alexander, her voice echoing off the marble floors, but no answer came. The dining room was empty, the table bare, no trace of the breakfast that had appeared every morning. The servants were gone, their aprons missing from the hooks, their footsteps silent. She checked the veranda, the study, the stables, nothing. The ranch hands, usually lingering near the fences, were nowhere to be seen. The whole place felt abandoned, like a town after a plague, the air thick with absence. Mary's boots crunched on the gravel as she walked the grounds, her heart pounding, her eyes scanning the horizon. Alexander was gone, and the silence told her he wasn't coming back. She returned to the house, her steps heavy drawn to the one place she hadn't looked, the door at the end of the hall. It stood ajar, the iron handle glinting in the weak light, no longer locked, no longer hiding its secrets. Mary's breath caught her hand, trembling as she pushed it open. The room was small, smaller than she'd imagined, its walls draped in dust-covered velvet, the air thick with the scent of old paper and faded flowers. A single window let in a sliver of gray light, illuminating a space that felt more like a shrine than a room. A wooden cradle sat in one corner, its varnish chipped a child's blanket folded inside. A dress hung on a hook blue, and worn, its lace frayed but soft, like something her mother might have worn. A stack of letters tied with twine rested on a table next to a tin music box, its handle rusted but still gleaming faintly. Mary's eyes stung as she touched the dress, her fingers tracing the fabric, her mother's face vivid in her mind. On the table, centered like an offering, was a leather folder, its edges worn but intact. Mary opened it, her hands unsteady, and found a will, its pages crisp and official, stamped with a notary's seal. Alexander Blackthorne's name was scrawled across the top, and below it, hers, Mary Dawson, heir to the Blackthorne Range, every acre, every horse, every coin. Her breath hitched, the words blurring as tears welled up. Beside the will was a letter folded, once addressed simply, "To my daughter." She sank into a chair, the wood creaking under her, and unfolded the paper, her heart a knot of hope and hurt. "Mary," it began, the handwriting shaky but clear. "I ain't got the right to ask your forgiveness, and I won't. I failed you before you were born, failed your mother when she needed me most. Isabella was my world, but my family tore her from me, called her nothing, sent her away with lies. They told me she was dead, and I was fool enough to believe it. When I learned she'd lived, had you, I searched, but the years had taken too much. I found you too late, a girl grown in a world I couldn't protect you from. This marriage, this farce, it was the only way I could give you what's yours, what I owed you both. If you ever felt your mother's love, know it was mine too, poured into her, into you, though I never had the chance to show it. Keep living decent, Mary. You're more than I ever was." The letter slipped from her hands, landing soft on the table. Mary pressed her palms to her eyes, tears spilling through her fingers, her chest tight with a grief she couldn't name. He'd known her, known who she was, and kept it locked away, not out of shame but out of fear. Fear of losing her again. Fear of a world that had already taken so much. She saw her mother's face in the photograph, her smile bright against Alexander's, a love that had survived in torn paper and silent regret. The room around her felt alive, its relics whispering of a life she'd never known, a family she'd carried in her pocket all along. She didn't know how long she sat there, the letter in her lap, the dress within reach. But a pull deep and certain stirred in her gut, the same feeling that had brought her to this ranch. Alexander had spoken of a place, a canyon he called, where my heart always goes back. She grabbed her coat, tucked the photographs and letter into her pocket, and saddled a horse from the stable, a sturdy mare with eyes as steady as her own. The canyon was a half-day's ride, its path winding through sagebrush and stone, the air sharp with the promise of rain. Mary rode hard, her heart leading her where her mind couldn't follow the photograph, a beacon in her pocket. The canyon opened before her, its walls red and jagged, a willow tree standing lone at its heart. There, beneath its branches, sat Alexander, his back against the trunk, his face pale as ash. He was weaker than she'd ever seen him, his breath shallow, his eyes half closed. She dismounted her boots, sinking into the soft earth, and knelt beside him, her hands hovering, afraid to touch. "You knew," she said, her voice breaking, the photographs trembling in her grip. "You knew all along, didn't you?" His eyes opened slow and heavy, and for the first time she saw something soft in them, something like love. "I knew," he whispered, his voice thin as the wind. "Couldn't say it, Mary. Couldn't risk losing you again. I owed you peace." She wanted to scream, to shake him, to demand why he'd let her grow up alone, why he'd hidden behind a marriage instead of a father's arms. But his hand reached for hers, cold and frail, and she saw her mother in his eyes, the same eyes she saw in the mirror. "I loved her," he said, his voice fading. "And you, more than I ever knew how to show." His breath slowed, his hand fell, and with a final sigh he was gone, the canyon quiet around them. Mary sat there, her father's hand in hers, the willow's branches swaying above. She cried then, not for the man she'd married, but for the father she'd found too late, for the mother who'd loved him, despite it all, for the girl who'd carried a torn photograph and a heart full of questions. The wind moved through the canyon, gentle now, carrying the scent of sage and earth, and Mary felt a peace settle over her fragile but real. 3 days later, Mary buried Alexander Blackthorne under the willow tree just as he'd wanted. No preacher, no crowd, just her, and the sun setting slow, painting the canyon in shades of gold and grief. She dug the grave herself. Her hands blistered, her heart heavy but steady. The photographs, now whole, lay in her pocket, their edges pressed together like a promise kept. She didn't speak as she covered him with earth, didn't pray, but she felt her mother's presence, her smile warm in the fading light. Alexander hadn't been hers for long, but he'd given her what he could, a name, a truth, a chance to start over. Back at Blackthorn Range, Mary stepped into a role she hadn't chosen, but couldn't refuse. The will was clear. The ranch was hers, every fence, every horse, every blade of grass. The servants returned, hesitant at first, their eyes still wary, but Mary didn't care for their whispers anymore. She called them together, her voice firm but kind, and raised their wages, gave them days to rest, opened the bunkhouse to the orphans and drifters who worked the rail camps nearby. "This place ain't just mine," she told them, standing on the veranda where Alexander had read his letters. "It's ours, long as you work honest and treat folks right." The ranch changed under her hands, slow but sure. She rode the fences each morning, her mare steady beneath her, the land no longer a cage, but a home. She hired more hands, paid them fair, and made sure no one went hungry. The townsfolk in Coyote Bluffs started talking, some calling her foolish, others saying she'd been tricked into a burden too big for a girl like her. But Mary didn't listen. She'd heard enough gossip in the streets, enough cruelty to last a lifetime. She knew what it was to be hungry, to be nobody, and she'd be damned if she let anyone else feel that way on her land. In the spring, she built a schoolhouse right in the heart of Coyote Bluffs, its red brick walls bright against the dusty streets. She named it the Isabella Dawson School after her mother, the woman who'd raised her on love and grit, who'd smiled in a photograph despite a broken heart. Mary wrote the lessons herself, sitting up late by candlelight, her pen scratching out stories of history numbers and how to live with honor. She taught the children herself, their faces, eager, their hands raised high. "Be kind," she told them, her voice soft but sure. "And don't ever let nobody tell you you ain't enough." Every evening as the sun dipped low, Mary rode back to the canyon to the willow tree where her father rested. She'd sit there, the photographs in her hands, their halves whole, her mother and father together again. "You didn't leave me," she'd whisper, her voice steady now, no longer trembling. "You just took too long to find your way back." The wind would answer soft and warm, carrying the scent of sage and the promise of tomorrow. The Blackthorn name lived on, not in wealth or power, but in the laughter of children, the kindness of a shared meal, the quiet strength of a woman who'd found her roots. Mary Dawson, daughter of Isabella, daughter of Alexander, had started with nothing but a torn photograph and a heart full of questions. Now she had a home, a purpose, and a love that stretched across years, across pain to a canyon where a willow tree stood guard over the truth. You know, after writing and breathing life into this story, I can't help but sit back and just feel it all. Mary Dawson's journey wasn't just a tale about poverty or identity or mystery. It was about what it means to carry questions you were never given answers to. It was about dignity in the face of humiliation and finding truth in places you never expected. This story to me is deeply human. It reminds us that love doesn't always come wrapped in comfort. Sometimes it shows up too late. Sometimes it wears the face of someone who hurt us. But even then, healing is possible. The truth, however painful, can still set us free. Alexander Blackthorne wasn't a hero. He was a broken man haunted by his past, and yet he tried clumsily, silently to make things right. And Mary, she's not just a survivor. She's the kind of character that stays with you raw, determined, full of questions, and unwilling to settle for the silence others gave her. This story gave me space to explore the complicated nature of forgiveness, the strange ways people try to right their wrongs, and how sometimes the family we never knew can still shape who we become. I'd really love to hear what you felt listening to this. Did Mary's story move you? Did it remind you of anything in your life, something left unsaid, or someone you wish you could understand better? Leave a comment. Let's talk about it. I want this channel to be a space for real conversations about stories that matter not just to entertain, but to connect us. If you're still here, thank you for taking the time. It means more than you know. Until next time, take care and keep chasing the truth.